Russian leader Vladimir Putin set to visit China to meet President Xi Jinping on the heels of the Trump-Xi summit in Beijing.
Well, they're expected to discuss the possibility of a gas pipeline to China, as well as bilateral trade and economic cooperation. President Putin's delegation includes several officials from Russian gas firms such as Rosneft and Gazprom.
China has become Russia's biggest trading partner, supplying about a third of Moscow's imports and buying more than 25% of Russian exports. In the first quarter of 2026, Russia increased its oil supplies to China by more than a third to 31 million metric tons.
All right, let's bring in Lyle Morris, who's Senior Fellow for Foreign Policy and National Security at the Center for China Analysis, Asia Society Policy Institute. Thank you for speaking with us. So, Lyle, President Putin will be in China, obviously, just days after President Trump's visit to Beijing. So what does this sequence tell us about how China wants to position itself diplomatically?
Yeah, I mean, first, I would say it's not a coincidence that the first foreign leader visiting Xi is Putin. They're very close. They probably have met more times. Xi has met more times with Putin than any other leader. And Xi really views his relationship with Putin, excuse me, and China's relationship with Russia, pardon me, as the most consequential relationship outside the United States. As I mentioned, they're very close. They've met several times. And there's a lot on the agenda, as we'll get to, I'm sure, later.
Lyle, the Kremlin has high expectations for the visit. But I'm thinking this might be a double-edged sword. Putin will obviously want to keep China on Russia's side economically, diplomatically. I'm wondering how you think Xi Jinping is going to respond and try to balance, I guess, the relationship with the U.S. and Russia at the same time.
It's a very careful balance, for sure. But, you know, as I said, the relationship with Putin is by far Xi's most important relationship outside of Trump. And now that Trump and Xi have met, Xi will most likely first want to brief Putin on what was discussed, what is the current state of play in U.S.-China relations. Putin will want to know, be very keen to know what was discussed as well, in particular, what Trump said on Iran, what is the plan for U.S.-China relations going forward. So you're right, it is a double-edged sword, but as I said, Xi has invested a great deal of political capital in his relationship with Putin and vice versa. As we know, Putin needs Xi and China, their economy, based on the war in Ukraine, which is not going very well for Putin. And China is Putin's biggest economic lifeline. They have very robust trade in oil and natural gas. So they both, in other words, they both need each other. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon.
Lyle, to your point about the two presidents, meaning Xi and Putin, meeting, many, many times before. So I'm wondering what level of concern would this create in Washington? I mean, is the U.S. going to be worried, or would the Trump administration be confident, that Xi right now anyway wants to stabilize U.S.-China relations and de-escalate tensions?
Well, if we know anything about Trump, it's that he's very confident. He thinks he has a good relationship with Putin and Russia. So I think in many ways, Trump thinks he can kind of triangulate the relationship. He can have a good relationship with Xi, he can have a good relationship with Putin. So I don't think there's a great deal of worry. Obviously, when it comes to nuclear weapons, arms control, which is a big push right now with Trump, he's hoping to basically have a trilateral arms control agreement between Russia and China and the U.S. So we'll have to see where that goes. But certainly, Russia is a strategic competitor of the United States. Trump is going to be watching this closely as well as many people in D.C. But as far as worry, I would say Trump is not the type of person to worry about this kind of thing.
So, Lyle, last week it was quite quiet. Russia's war in Ukraine, we didn't hear much of it coming out of Trump-Xi, but still, that issue remains a major backdrop to this week's meeting. What should we watch for in China's language on the war, and how much sway does Beijing have with Moscow?
Beijing has a tremendous amount of sway, but publicly they have to push this narrative that that China is not supporting Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. So they're going to, this is going to be a very careful diplomatic dance where they both, support each other's national interests. Usually, China doesn't speak specifically about the war in Ukraine. They speak more about conflict and about stability in the region. Of course, behind closed doors, we know that they will talk about the war in Ukraine. Putin will probably brief Xi on the current state of play, and Xi will probably brief Putin on where China's at when it comes to diplomacy in Ukraine. But we all have to wait to see. We all expect that at some point in the next year, Trump will try to again broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. But China is by far the most consequential actor here. So the bottom line is Putin it relies heavily on China as a lifeline and will look to China to basically backstop Russia as the US sanctions continue on Russia, as the EU kind of puts pressure on Putin and Russia. So there sort of are the two, they both need each other for better or worse. They're kind of bedfellows. And as we will have to wait and see what comes out of this summit, but I expect oil and natural gas to be a very big component of this relationship and this meeting. Mm-hmm. All signs point to a new LNG pipeline between Russia and China. So that's very important for Russia's economy, and most likely China will oblige.
Right. Lyle, Russia insists that the timing of this meeting is coincidental. Very few people believe that, including you. So I do want to ask you about what continues to trickle out following the Trump-Xi summit, the latest being that $17 billion farm deal. I'm wondering how important you think this is in the context of the Trump-Xi summit. Is it political, economic, strategic, or maybe all of the above?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's all the above. Definitely for China's economy and for Russia's economy, they need each other. I think China's in the point now where they realize they can't rely on the US as its most important market and actor for economic relations with Beijing. So they're looking for basically to offset some of the pressure that they feel by the US when it comes to tech controls and this de-risking argument going on in DC. So it's sort of like a insurance policy for China and for Russia, quite frankly. So as I said, I expect major agreements. In fact, one of the things I think is interesting about this Putin-Xi summit is I hear that the amount of agreements to be signed is greater than the amount of agreements between the US and China. So again, that speaks to the importance of the economic relationship. So after the Trump-Xi summit, I think Xi is looking for reliable partners for sure. Russia is arguably China's most reliable partner. And so this is just going to bolster that relationship.
Understood, Lyle. We leave it there. And thank you so much for talking to us on the show today. Lyle Morris is Senior Fellow for Foreign Policy and National Security at the Center for China Analysis at the Asia Society Policy Institute.